Apple TV Plus is the best streaming service in 2025, and I'm here to tell you why. Now, we live in a very divisive world right now, with the current political climate, Oscar nominations and snubs, and if the Super Bowl halftime show was actually any good. I don't know why that was so divisive, I thought it was fine. But if there's one thing I think we can all agree on, it's that there are way too many damn streaming services nowadays. We've got Netflix and Hulu, Max, Prime Disney Video, Plus, Paramount Plus, Peacock, Sling TV, Fubo, YouTube TV, Crunchyroll TV, AMC Plus, Discovery Plus, Showtime Plus, and it can be really hard to decide where to spend your hard-earned cash. Which leads me to what I feel is a fairly underrated service compared to the other streaming services. And no, it's not Chick-fil-A Play, shout out to those of you who watched that video, but it's Apple TV Plus. And there's really only one reason I'm advocating for this one over the rest, and that's the shows. Now, quick disclaimer before I get more into this video is not sponsored. I am not getting paid by Apple to say any of this. This is all just my own personal opinion. Also, I'm not really about to get into the interface or its functionality because, to be honest, it's not any better or worse than any other app. You have a trending section, you can browse, you can search. Oh my god, the possibilities are endless. This is the exact same concept that every other app uses. They're not rebuilding the wheel here. I also don't really care about going into the subscription cost either, though I will say right now it's only $9.99 a month, which is actually not too bad compared to the other services, though of course this app has less content than most of those, so you know, take with that what you will. However, like I mentioned, it's the content that sets this app apart from the rest in my opinion. I shit you not, I have not watched a bad movie or show on this app. Every show has been a hit, with some of them becoming my favorite shows of all time, at least so far. I'll get to that later. Now, I'm not denying that there are probably some shows or movies on this app that are bad, but I myself have not experienced that yet. So to further my point, I want to take this video to basically highlight every show and movie I've watched on Apple TV Plus, just to give you some insight on what this app can offer. And remember that I am a dumbass on the internet whose opinion you don't need to listen to. So if you don't agree with me, totally fine. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I honestly just wanted an excuse to talk about some of my favorite shows. So let's get into it. So the first show we have is a mini series called Blackbird, and this was the first show I watched on this app. By the way, I'm gonna remain fairly spoiler free for this video. I'm only gonna get into the premise of these shows, so you don't have to worry too much. But it's roughly based on a true story of this man named Jimmy Keene, who in order to get out of a lengthy prison sentence goes undercover to befriend and uncover truths from a serial killer named Larry Hall. So the show basically follows Jimmy in his attempts to try to get Hall to confess his crimes and spill his secrets. And I gotta say, the acting in this show is incredible. I've been a fan of Taron Egerton since the Kingsman days, and he really delivers in this show. You can see his struggles with morality as he tries to stay on the right side of history while also trying to befriend one of the most elusive serial killers. And same with Paul Walter Hauser, who played Larry Hall. He did a great job of making everything tense and uncomfortable. Sometimes he seemed sweet but could lash out at any moment, making him a really interesting and complex psychological character. And the show itself is great too, as it's fun to see how the story unfolds. There's a good bit of mystery, a good bit of emotional and psychological moments, and they're all handled really well. And plus, it's a short story, which is good because it doesn't overstay its welcome. Honestly, if you're a fan of shows like True Detective or Mindhunters, this is probably the show for you. The next show, which was honestly a great surprise for me, is Shrinking. It's a story about a few therapists basically trying to help their clients make their way through life, while also dealing with their own fucked up lives. And I know a lot of people think of this show as a comedy. No, it isn't. Okay, first, it is technically labeled as a drama, but more importantly, this is not any funnier than it is depressing. I mean, wow. I was severely unprepared for the amount of emotional depth that would show up unannounced in this show. But honestly, that's what made it work. It was incredibly relatable to that of life. One moment I would laugh my ass off, and the next I'd start tearing up. But it was kind of a natural feeling, you know, something you've experienced in your life before. Now I'll admit, the show's not perfect. There's definitely some dumb moments where I even roll my eyes. It definitely has a lot of comedy styled moments that can hit, but don't always. But what I like is they have a character for everyone. You can find someone relatable to you in this show. And with that, even though Jason Segel is technically the main character, every character in this show gets main character-like storylines, and they're actually engaging and fun to watch. You have dealings with loss, you have dealings with growing old and losing parts of yourself. You have struggles of PTSD. You have a teenager making her way through high school. You have an empty nest storyline. It's kind of a show for everyone. The acting's great. I especially love Harrison Ford in it. He's absolutely hilarious. I honestly doubt they even gave him a script. He's probably just saying whatever comes to mind. But if you want a show that really makes you feel, this is the one for you. Because again, it can be really emotional at times, and I think that's a really healthy approach to shows like this, because like in Inside Out, you can't have all of these funny feel-good moments without having at least some sadness to balance it out, which I don't think enough comedy shows do. So I think this show does a really good job with that. Now, before we get into the next show, I want to quickly go through the movies I've seen from Apple. There really hasn't been that many of them that I've seen, and I feel like they're not actually making that many movies. And I also do think that the shows shine just a bit brighter, so I'm not going to spend too much time on these ones. Either way, here are the ones I've seen so far. The first is Killers of the Flower Moon, and I think a lot of people have heard of or seen this already because of all the nominations, but to be honest, it really wasn't for me. But I can definitely acknowledge that it's a good movie. Like, it's very well made, very well directed, very well acted, but just not really for me personally. I think if you like history dramas and Leonardo DiCaprio, Martin Scorsese, you'll have a good time with it. The next is Ghosted, which is probably the worst thing I've seen on Apple so far, but I went into it with pretty low expectations, and it ended up being a decent action movie with some fun cameos, so I can't really complain. It was a fun watch. The next two are a little more interesting though, and the first is Tetris, which is the story of how Tetris came to be, more or less. It's got Taron Egerton again, who does great, and it was actually a lot more interesting than I thought it would be. I actually really enjoyed the history and legality of Tetris, something I'd never thought I'd say until I watched this movie. Now, of course, Apple is not above the Hollywood tropes of over-exaggerated real-life events or straight up just lying with movies like these, so I'm sure there are a lot of inaccuracies in this movie, but it's still a fun watch. Then the last movie, which I feel is pretty underrated, is Cherry, which is a war-ish drama featuring Tom Holland. Because you know, every Spider-Man actor has to be in a war movie at some point in their career while also dating their co-stars. Sorry, man. You'll get her next time. But it's a story about a soldier trying to reintegrate into society, but turning to a life of drugs and eventually armed robbery. I can say it's definitely a good watch, but not necessarily a fun watch. It can be pretty depressing. But I feel like a lot of people think Tom Holland gets cast in bad movies besides Spider-Man, but I think this is a good exception. I think this is definitely one of his better movies, and I really enjoyed it. Now back to the shows, we have another surprising one that I never would have watched if it wasn't for my mother. So shout out to her because I really like this show, Lessons in Chemistry. It's based on the book by Bonnie Garmus, I don't know how to pronounce that name, and it's a story about a woman in the 60s who is a brilliant scientist. However, with it being a heavily male-dominated field, she struggles to create a proper career out of it. So she accepts a job as a host for a cooking show in which she uses her science to educate women how to cook properly and accurately. And it's a very interesting concept for a show. What I like about it first and foremost is how they handle both sexism and racism in this show, mainly because of how they incorporate it into the story. While I'm of the mind that we need to make sure we educate people on how discrimination is a terrible thing and how it affects people, I hate when it's thrown into a situation that didn't ask for it. And no, this is not some woke rant. I hate that fucking word. It's lost all of its merit if it even had any to begin with. But the show highlights discrimination in a way that shows how it affects people and how to go about change while not taking away anything from the main storyline. In fact, it probably improves it. And with that, what I like about the show is that while the main plot point has to do with her and her cooking show, it's honestly not really the focus of the show. The show deals more with her finding love, discovering friendship, learning what it's like to be human. And I know that sounds corny, but when you watch the show, you'll know what I mean. It's one of those shows that goes way beyond the surface of what it needed to, in a good way. And it's probably my favorite performance from Brie Larson. I think she was made for this role. I know a lot of people don't really like her, but she's great in this. Also, for all of you Marvel fans, Louis Pullman is in this, who will be playing Sentry in the Thunderbolts movie. And this show will definitely give you a good idea of how good his acting is. So like I said, I would definitely recommend this show. The fourth show we're going to talk about is the one that has become one of my all-time favorites, Ted Lasso. Listen, if you do not even remotely like this show, I do not want to be friends with you. So Ted Lasso is a comedy drama that focuses on Ted Lasso, a college football coach who moves to England to coach football or soccer. And one of the big story points is that he doesn't know how to coach soccer. But what I love about this show is that it is so much more than that storyline, kind of like lessons in chemistry. As you watch the show, you realize that Ted is not as much of a sports coach as he is a life coach. He does whatever he can to make the lives of the people around him better. And I love seeing the growth of those people as they warm up to him, befriend him, and learn from him, and vice versa. It is one of the most feel-good shows you can ever watch. Now, a lot like Shrinking, what I love too is it is not all fun and games. They come in with some very heavy moments from a lot of characters, but especially Ted. He's very much like comedians you know who seem like the happiest and funniest people, but deep down they're dealing with some seriously dark truths. And it's incredible to see that in a show that 90% of the time makes me feel as happy as I can watching a show. But like I said, the characters are fantastic. I think we can all agree that Roy Kent is one of the best characters ever written in a comedy show. There's some incredible storylines of perseverance and redemption, especially of certain characters. If you've watched the show, you know exactly who I'm talking about. But all while having some of the funniest jokes and one-liners I've ever heard. It's just so fun and heartwarming and feel good, and it's the perfect show to watch after a long day. I seriously, truly could not recommend this show enough. Now, before we get into the last show, I want to talk about a few honorable mentions. And the only reason these are honorable mentions is that I simply haven't watched them yet. But from what I've heard, these are all great shows as well. So let me just run through them really quick. First off, Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. Now, I'm not the biggest Godzilla fan ever. I mean, Kong Skull Island fucking slaps, but I've heard this show is really good and I've been meaning to check it out. Kurt Russell and Wyatt Russell apparently kill it, and it's a great continuation of the whole Monsterverse. So if you like those movies, you should really enjoy the show. The second is Dark Matter, which is this sci-fi show about alternate realities and multiverse stuff. I think it's based on a book, but my dad watched the show and he really liked it, so it might be worth checking out. Third is Masters of the Air, which is a World War II show specifically about the Air Force, but I think it falls in line with Band of Brothers in terms of quality and storytelling, though I'm not positive because, again, I haven't seen it. I just heard it was good. So if you like war shows, maybe check it out. The fourth is Prehistoric Planet, which is pretty much a planet Earth, but for dinosaurs. And I heard it's a fairly accurate depiction of what animal life would be like way back when. I think I might have even watched an episode or two at one point, and from what I remember, it was pretty good. And the last honorable mention is actually next on my list to watch, and that's Silo. It's about a community that lives underground after something happened that made the air unbreathable topside, I would assume. I think it's kind of like Fallout, but I've heard there's a lot of drama and mystery within the community, which is why it's so compelling. I've also heard that it's very similar to the final show I'm going to talk about, which is my favorite show, which is why Silo is next on my list of things to watch. Now for the final show to talk about, and I'm sure some of you could guess it, but it's Severance. I kid you not, this is my favorite show of all time so far. I say so far because it's not done yet, and that's the same with Ted Lasso apparently. There's a season 4 coming out for that too. So hopefully they don't Game of Thrones either of these shows by ruining the endings. But with that said, the way we all as a society felt when we watched the early seasons of Game of Thrones, you will feel watching Severance. It's that good. So the premise is kind of complicated to explain, but I'll try my best. Basically, it's a world where there's this technology that if you choose, you can sever or split your mind in two. One part of your mind will be your normal day-to-day self, or outie as they say in the show. The other version will be your work version, who will only know life inside of their workplace, and they call them innies or severed. Basically, the minute you walk into your work, your memory turns off, and the next thing you'll remember is leaving work that night, while your other version will just know work and nothing else. It's kind of hard to explain with words, but the show does a really great job at explaining it. But it is a super interesting concept and an incredible starting point for a show. But man, is the show so much more than that. There are a ton of mysteries set up beyond just the severance procedure, and they constantly reel you in throughout the show. What I love most is they always give you just enough information to be intrigued. They answer just enough to keep you interested without answering the main questions. Every episode leaves me wanting more. Not that it didn't give me enough, but that it's so good I want to keep watching. The acting is fantastic and honestly Oscar worthy across the board. The set designs are incredible, and the cinematography is some of the best I've ever seen, especially when you consider how relatively minimalistic and honestly boring the settings are. Now, as I'm recording this, they're in the middle of releasing season 2, and it is just as good as season 1. I am so incredibly impressed impressed with this show. And side note, over half of the show is directed by the Ben Stiller. Like what? Frickin' Zoolander, Night at the Museum, Rachel's Date, Who Yells Too Much is directing the best drama thrillers ever? What timeline are we living in? But again, I have not had a show leave me with my mouth wide open and staying up late trying to figure out the mysteries with my friends and family this much, like ever. Again, the show is not done and they can definitely screw it up, but so far, this is on par with some of the greats. Breaking Bad, early Game of Thrones, it really is that good. And honestly, I'm not kidding, I would get Apple TV Plus just for this show alone. I'd do it. 12 out of 10, could not recommend this show enough. Mic drop. I probably shouldn't do that, this is expensive. So that is every show and movie I have watched so far, with more to watch down the road. And again, this is all just my opinion, so if you don't like any of the shows or you hate Apple, totally cool. I honestly just felt like praising something for a change since I usually just complain about stuff, and also I selfishly want more people to watch Severance so I can talk to more people about it. So go watch Severance. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought. And what streaming services do you think will be the best in 2025? Because for me, I feel like most of them now rely on just 3 to 4 giant IPs, while the other shows they make are all trash. And that's why I like Apple, because so far it seems like every show they put out is good. But again, that can't last forever, so I'll be sure to let you guys know when I finally watch a bad one. Anyway, that's all for me, so much love, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.